Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers, and the lighting, well, sucks. I'm your host, Nathan P. Butler here, and this is a brand new web series. What you're watching now is episode number 0. Now, in our first episode, episode 1, we're going to be taking a look at the A New Hope novelization by Alan Dean Foster, because our whole mission here is to look at the Star Wars novels and comics in publication order to see how the expanded universe developed. First appearances, notable contributions to the EU, how Star Wars has evolved as a saga. But this episode, episode 0, this one's meant to give you some background here. The genesis of the show, what the show is intended to be as we go along, and a little bit about me. So hopefully there is a sense of credibility about me and the show as we move from episode to episode to episode. Don't want you to feel like you're just listening to some other Yahoo out here on the internet babbling on and on about Star Wars, though it's kind of what it is. Just happens to be me that's doing the babbling. So let me give you a sense here of who I am and what this show is supposed to be. First off, I'm a lifelong Star Wars fan. Again, Nathan P. Butler is my name. You can call me Nate in the comments, whatever. I've been a fan since basically before I could actually remember. My mom took me to see The Empire Strikes Back as a baby, which is not something I would recommend doing. Babies in theaters drive me crazy. I then remember seeing Return of the Jedi when I was very young. I eventually became a Star Wars EU reader in 1992, officially, when I saw Dark Force Rising on the shelves at a local bookstore. Wound up picking up that, Heir to the Empire, and started off from there. Wound up picking up Dark Empire that same year. Some of the issues were already out, and started reading the Star Wars comics from there. I had picked up some Marvel comic Star Wars stories way back when I was a kid, some of the Return of the Jedi adaptation and a few issues right afterwards, but nothing that really got me into collecting. After that, when I became older, starting with Dark Force Rising, I did become a Star Wars EU reader and, as you can see behind me, collector at the same time. I've also had a chance, though, to participate both in Star Wars fandom and in Star Wars officialdom, if that's what you want to call it. From a fandom standpoint, starting in 1997, I've been the creator, I was going to say the producer, but the creator of the Star Wars Timeline Project, now known as the Star Wars Timeline Gold. It is the single most comprehensive Star Wars chronology document available anywhere, and I believe that includes in any language and within Lucasfilm, because their Holocron Continuity Database is essentially a database, not a continuity or chronology document. It's about 2,000 pages long at this point. It goes through the entire Star Wars saga. Pretty much my internet claim to fame, although maybe there's some other stuff I would prefer. You know, some of the books that I've written maybe should be it instead of something that I can't get paid for. But suffice to say, it is out there. StarWarsFanWorks.com/timeline is where to find it. I also run the site that is based out of, StarWarsFanWorks.com, which is the internet's home of Star Wars fan audio, as I bill it. It is a site designed around bringing Star Wars podcasts, audio dramas, and audio parodies into one place as sort of a directory so that people can find what they're looking for when they want to see new Star Wars audio content. Hardest thing out there is to find stuff that's new because there's so much out there, so many shows that start and then just die, and of course, it's not always the easiest thing to find good Star Wars podcasts on, say, iTunes or Zune Marketplace. You got to sort of have something to narrow down your search to know what you're wanting to actually hear about, not just something with Star Wars in the title. So StarWarsFanWorks.com is my site to do that. I am also myself a Star Wars podcaster. My team and I put together the first serious Star Wars fan audio drama released online at all that we know of back in 2002 called Second Strike. I produced several Star Wars fan audio dramas since then, including a Choose Your Own Adventure one called Always in Motion Ambush on Ankara. You can find those and the other ones on StarWarsFanWorks.com. Podcasting-wise, though, that's the main thing I've been doing in Star Wars audio. I started Star Wars podcasting in 2002, before the word technically existed, I guess. We called it internet radio at the time, with a show called Chrono Radio. Since then, I've done other shows like The Butlerniverse, Fan Audio Made Easy, The EU Review over at solosound.net with Andrew Loopy, and now aside from doing segments on shows like Star Wars Action News, I'm now a regular contributor or a regular team member of Star Wars Beyond the Films with Mark Herleman over at StarWarsReport.com. We have a weekly show that discusses Star Wars Expanded Universe topics. And I am also a regular panelist, part of a rotating group of panelists on Republic Forces Radio Network over at RepublicForces.com, the show dedicated to the Clone Wars cartoon series by the same team that puts together Star Wars Action News, Venganza Media. I've also had a chance to dabble, like I said, a little bit in Star Wars officialdom from time to time. In 2004, I had the opportunity to actually write a Star Wars comic story. It was called Equals and Opposites, featured Kyle Katarn and Jan Ors from the Dark Forces Jedi Knight video games, and the Yuuzhan Vong from the new Jedi Order novel series, which at that time hadn't really appeared much in comic book form. That story, Equals and Opposites, appeared in Star Wars Tales number 21, art cover version, was also released with a photo, or I call it photoshopped, cover version here. It was later collected, probably the easiest way to find it now, into Star Wars Tales Volume 6, which is the last of these to collect the different anthology issues from the Star Wars Tales comic series. It ended with issue 24, just 3 issues after the one in which my story appeared. I was thrilled later to find that they then took that story, just my story, and pulled it out by itself and gave it its own special comic. So this is still Star Wars Tales 21, slightly different cover because of the cog and a little bit of the design of the title here, but this is just my story in a comic. But this wasn't one you could buy individually. I got the honor of being one of the Star Wars writers to have his story turned into a Hasbro comic pack. That special version of the comic showed up in this comic pack with Kyle Katarn in his second action figure ever and the first ever Yuuzhan Vong Warrior action figure. Very, very psyched whenever this came out. So I've had a chance to dabble a little bit, and it wound up spinning off into action figures, which was amazingly cool for a nerd like me who has, among other things, little Transformers Star Wars action figures back there. Don't have a lot of action figures, but the ones I do, I really like. So I've had a chance to dabble in that sense. That wound up getting me a chance to, because of my chronology knowledge and stuff, contribute to the Star Wars Essential Atlas by Dan Wallace and Jason Fry. You'll find in here several maps with in-universe digital dates like the Road to Coruscant, the Hunt for Zinj, the Thrawn campaign. I put together the dates that are on those maps for the individual battles. Let me choose things like the actual birth date for Jason and Jaina Solo. I got to choose the actual date on which, in-universe, the New Republic manages to take over Coruscant from the Empire in Wedge's Gamble. And got a chance, really kind of a shock to me, to set the in-universe calendar date for Return of the Jedi, which boggled my mind to get the opportunity, but it's in there. So, contributed to this one. Not a lot. Most of the work there is Dan and Jason by far beyond anything I contribute. I'm a little speck in that. But I did get a chance to contribute there. I've also had a chance to contribute to the EU in the What's the Story contest. Did some background for the DC-0052 Intergalactic Speeder, though most of the background there is somebody else's. I added some little tidbits here and there, not very much. I've also contributed to some unofficial stuff. I've been an interview subject in the sociological study called Using the Force, Creativity, Community, and Star Wars Fans by Will Brooker. I've also had a chance to contribute an article on Star Wars chronology and continuity for the Star Wars Super Collector's Wish Book 4th edition from Jeffrey Todd Carlton. I've also been even more psyched, because this was very early on, to see my name in print getting thanked by authors who have used my materials as a resource or have seen my materials out there as a good resource for fans, like my Star Wars Timeline project. Had a chance to get my first acknowledgement ever in a Star Wars publication in the New Essential Guide to Characters, also by Dan Wallace, and most recently found myself and other Star Wars timeliners being given an acknowledgement in the Star Wars Essential Reader's Companion. We're going to come back to this because this is a big inspiration for this web series you're watching right now. Now, thanks to my experience writing for Star Wars Tales, that sort of built up my confidence a little bit, and I got into doing a little bit of writing on the side of my main career. Did some self-published works. Echoes, murder mystery kind of thing. It's eventually going to be reworked for professional publication, but it's a very slow-going process, so Echo's not really out there anymore at this point. I also did a self-published time travel, telepaths, thriller kind of novel, which I really like. It's probably my favorite thing I've ever written, called Greater Good. That was originally self-published. It has recently been professionally published through Grail Quest Books as Greater Good with the little revised and expanded up there because it now has a new afterword and a few tweaks to it. If you ever want to support anything that I do, this is the one thing I think you'd probably enjoy, and I'd enjoy hearing your feedback on. Greater Good. All of my published works are all over at nathanpbutler.com. You can also find some educational podcasts that I did over there for U.S. history, world history, economics, and I'm eventually going to have one up there for United States government, all based on the Georgia curriculum, but applicable for students pretty much across the country if you're into that sort of thing. I have also, with Grail Quest Books, the same company that published Greater Good, have been working on the Wars, the Battle of Phobos novella series. It's based on the old Decipher science fiction property, the same company that had the Star Wars CCG back in the day. They have licensed that out and are now producing a 9-novella series that is a lead-up to the original game that can be read as a standalone story. I'm writing 2 out of the 9 novellas in that series. My first, for the Earther faction here, called Healers and Hunters, has a graphic novella version, plus there is the ebook version. It was later collected in Wars: The Battle of Phobos Volume 1 Preludes, which has been re-released with a more striking cover recently, with this really, really neat look here. I have written a second one in that series called On Red Soil. It's currently out as an ebook. It will eventually wind up in a second collected edition called Streddy, but that's not out yet. Should be out sometime late 2012, early 2013. But my work on that series is pretty much done at this point, barring any future short stories or anything like that. So, Star Wars fan, podcaster, timeliner, writer. Professionally, I'm actually a teacher. My day job is that I teach world history and AP, Advanced Placement World History, in Georgia. I've taught economics, I've taught constitutional law, debate, American government. My bachelor's is in secondary education, social studies, with a focus on economics, government, and U.S. history rather than world history. And I also have a master's degree in education with a focus on integrating technology in the classroom. So I'm an educator. You might have caught that by the cadence, perhaps, and the theme of this series in general, or the timeline being very much tied into something that's educational. But I want to sort of bring these things together. Star Wars, fandom, education. I want to give you something that is a great educational resource, hopefully, for new and old fans alike here. Partly inspired by the Star Wars Essential Readers Companion that goes through the Star Wars novels and younger reader books in chronological order with little tidbits about them as they go along in print, and by the earlier Star Wars The Comics Companion book, which does something very similar for Star Wars comics as produced by Dark Horse Comics, and based mostly on a suggestion from a fan of the podcast. We're starting up this new series, From the Star Wars Library. It's sort of a play on words here because this is my Star Wars library in part behind me. This is a very long shelf. I'll go in some other separate video clip giving you sort of a tour of the Star Wars library itself, the stuff that I've got here. Not enough time to go into it right now. But suffice to say, we had a listener named David Noche. And David, every time that I would talk about doing something new as Star Wars video content, even before doing those X-Wing miniatures reviews that I did, he was always suggesting do something that can showcase your collection, but also something that would be sort of a guide for new readers. Let's go through the Star Wars books. You could do it. There's tons of them. You could do a whole series out of it. And I always said, wow, that would take a lot of time and effort. But you know, having now read Pablo Hidalgo's Essential Readers Companion and having a chance to have been acknowledged in it, I'm kind of fired up about this idea, and I finally told David, you know what? You've got it. We're doing it. So thanks very much to David Noche's great idea. Here we are, Star Wars as a new web series from the Star Wars library. What we're going to do each episode is highlight one book or one series of books or one comic or one series of comics, depending on what's appropriate. We're going to look at who wrote it, what the impact was on the EU, is there anything special about this author writing this particular book, are there any notable first appearances, oddball little items, some general thoughts of mine on the books, though not full-blown reviews, and just sort of a guide. So that if you are a Star Wars EU reader, or if you were like me reading as they were being published, you can kind of follow along and enjoy the ride and hopefully take some of that ride with me as we go. In our first episode, the very next one that you're going to see, we will be taking a look at the A New Hope novelization by Alan Dean Foster, who I had the pleasure of meeting at one point at the first Con Carolinas in Charlotte, North Carolina that I ever went to. So, hopefully this gives you a sense of who I am, a sense of why I'm doing this, what we're going to be doing, and a little bit of the background of me so that you hopefully think there's at least some credibility behind what I'm saying. And if all that has been to your liking, then I hope you will check out our first episode and enjoy From the Star Wars Library. As we will always end, thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the readers. Good night, everybody.